The first sound was a groan. Not human, but the deep, tortured protest of 30,000 tons of steel being bent by something it was never meant to meet. Then came the shriek, a high-frequency tearing of metal that vibrated through the deck plates and into the marrow of Lieutenant Anya Sharma's bones. She was in the USS Virginia's tiny sick bay, a sterile white box buried in the belly of the nuclear submarine, running a routine inventory of suture kits. One moment, the world was the familiar, gentle hum of the reactor and the rhythmic hiss of the air scrubbers. The next, the world tilted violently, flinging her against a steel cabinet. The suture kits rained down around her like confetti at a disastrous party. "Collision! Collision! Brace for impact!" The voice over the 1MC, the ship's public address system, was stretched thin with panic. Then came the lights, flickering once, twice, before surrendering to the crimson glow of the emergency bat ops. Red light bathed everything in a hellish, urgent hue. Anya's training slammed into place, a rigid framework over the rising panic. She grabbed the edge of her steel desk, riding out the second shudder as the boat listed heavily to port. "Secure supplies. Prepare for casualties. Stay at your post." The mantra was a lifeline. She methodically began latching cabinets, her movements economical and sure, even as the deck canted beneath her feet. A new alarm joined the chorus, a frantic, pulsing whoop that meant only one thing. "Flooding! Flooding! Flooding in compartments forward of the reactor!" The Atlantic was coming in. 2 miles above them was the surface. 2 miles of crushing, frigid water that wanted to reclaim this pocket of air and steel. Her station, sick bay, was aft of the reactor. Protocol was ironclad. In the event of a hull breach, watertight doors seal. You stay in your section. You become an island. You wait. The internal comm crackled to life, a cacophony of panicked shouts. "Breach near the radio room. A hull plate's buckled. Miller, get that? Carter's down." The radio room, the sub's holy of holies, the secure compartment where the cryptographers worked their silent magic. Carter's down. The name snagged in her mind. Petty Officer Ben Carter, 21 years old, from Idaho. She'd treated him for a sinus infection 2 weeks ago. He had a goofy smile and a picture of a golden retriever taped to the inside of his locker. "Stay at your post." The voice of her commanding officer from training echoed in her head. "Your job, Lieutenant, is to be the calm center of the storm. They bring the wounded to you. You do not go to them. You are the Rock." But the Rock was hearing shouts of a boy she knew, bleeding somewhere in the dark while the ocean poured in. The comms were chaos, but one thing was clear. The response team wasn't there yet. They were dealing with the breach itself. Carter was alone, except for Miller, Lieutenant Miller. A humorless, physically imposing officer from the weapons division, whom Anya had always found unnervingly intense. She looked at her neatly organized sickbay, a sanctuary of order waiting for chaos to be delivered to its door. And she thought of Ben Carter, with his goofy smile, bleeding in a flooding compartment. Her training screamed at her to wait. Her soul screamed at her to move. In the end, it wasn't even a choice. She grabbed her combat lifesaver bag, her go bag, stocked with tourniquets, pressure dressings, and hemostatic agents. Slinging it over her shoulder, she unlatched the sickbay door. The passageway was a nightmare. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and salt water. Men were shouting, running, their faces pale and slick with sweat in the dim red light. A fine, cold mist hung in the air. "Lieutenant, what are you doing? We have to seal this hatch," a young sailor yelled, his hand on the lever of a watertight door. "I have a casualty call," Anya lied, her voice a calm, authoritative blade that cut through his panic. "Keep it open until I'm through." He hesitated, his eyes wide, then nodded and let her pass. She plunged deeper into the boat, moving against the flow of personnel who were rightly scrambling towards the safer aft sections. The deck was slick with seawater. The groaning of the hull was louder here, a constant, terrifying reminder of the pressure trying to crush them. She found the hatch to the radio room access corridor. It was dogged open, twisted on its hinges. The flooding was worse here. Ankle-deep water sloshed around her boots, frigid and black. The lights in this section were completely gone. She fumbled for the flashlight on her belt, its beam cutting a shaky cone through the darkness. The beam found them. The scene wasn't what she expected. It wasn't a medical emergency. It was a struggle. Ben Carter was on the floor, propped against a server bank, his face a mask of pain. Blood matted his dark hair from a nasty gash on his forehead. He was conscious, his eyes wide with terror, and he was clutching a heavy, reinforced laptop case to his chest with a death grip. Standing over him wasn't a rescuer. It was Lieutenant Miller. Miller wasn't rendering aid. His face was a snarl of pure fury. He had one hand tangled in Carter's collar, the other trying to pry the case from the younger man's grasp. "Give it to me, you little worm!" Miller hissed, his voice a low growl barely audible over the hiss of a nearby ruptured pipe. "No, I can't!" Carter gasped, his knuckles white. Anya's mind processed it in a clinical instant. Carter's head wound, Miller's aggression, the object of the struggle. This wasn't a rescue. It was an assault. Miller was the threat. "Lieutenant Miller, stand down!" Anya's voice rang out, sharp and clear. Miller's head snapped up, his eyes wild in her flashlight beam. He looked like a wolf interrupted at a kill. "Nurse, get the hell out of here. This is a security matter." "He's injured. I'm rendering aid," Anya stated, walking forward, the water sloshing around her. She deliberately moved her flashlight beam from Miller's face down to the blood running down Carter's temple. "I am the ranking medical authority on this vessel, and I am ordering you to step away from my patient." Miller laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You don't have the authority to order me to do anything. Now back off before you get hurt." He gave the case another violent tug, and Carter cried out in pain. Anya didn't have a weapon. She didn't have rank that mattered in this context. She had a 50-pound medical bag and 120 pounds of conviction. She closed the remaining distance in 3 steps. She didn't go for Miller. She went for Carter. She dropped to her knees in the icy water, shoving her body between the 2 men. It was an instinctive, protective gesture. She pressed her back against Miller's legs, creating a physical barrier. At the same time, she brought her medical bag around, placing it over Carter's hands and the case he was protecting. It was a clumsy, desperate shield. "I said, step. Away," she grunted, her shoulder blades digging into Miller's shins. She felt his muscles tense. He was going to shove her aside, maybe worse. She didn't look back at him. Her focus was on Carter. "Petty Officer Carter, can you hear me? My name is Lieutenant Sharma. I'm here to help you. Squeeze my hand if you understand." Her voice was calm, professional, the one she used for terrified patients. It was an anchor of sanity in the madness. Carter's terrified eyes locked onto hers. His hand, shaking, found hers and squeezed weakly. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Miller roared from behind her. He grabbed her shoulder, his fingers digging in like claws. Before he could throw her off, the corridor was flooded with the blinding white light of a dozen tactical flashlights. "Navy, don't move!" The sub's Marine Security Detachment had arrived. They stormed the compartment, M4 rifles raised, their black combat gear a stark contrast to the chaos. They found a scene frozen in a bizarre tableau. A bleeding sailor clutching a case, a furious officer looming over him, and a small, determined Navy nurse in the middle of it all, shielding her patient with her own body. The journey back to Norfolk Naval Station was a silent, suffocating hell. The USS Virginia moved like a wounded beast, her crew speaking in hushed, exhausted tones. For Anya, the silence was one of isolation. She was no longer Lieutenant Sharma, the boat's trusted nurse. She was a problem. A line item in an incident report. Upon docking, she wasn't debriefed with the rest of the crew. She was escorted, like a prisoner, to a sterile office in the base command building. Waiting for her was Commander Davies, the submarine's executive officer. He was a man carved from granite and regulations, with a jaw that looked permanently clenched and eyes that seemed to view the world as a series of checklist violations. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring out the window at the shipyard, not even bothering to look at her as she entered. "Lieutenant Sharma," he began, his voice flat and cold, "you have created a situation of profound complexity for me." Anya stood at attention, her gaze fixed on the wall behind his head. "Sir, my only intention was to render aid to Petty Officer Carter." Davies finally turned, his eyes sweeping over her with palpable disdain. "Your intention is irrelevant. What is relevant are your actions. You abandoned your post during a catastrophic emergency. You disobeyed the standing order to shelter in place and maintain sectional integrity. You traversed 3 watertight security points without authorization. And you directly interfered with a ranking officer in the performance of his duties. Do you have any idea of the chain of command you shattered?" "With all due respect, sir, Lieutenant Miller was assaulting an injured sailor." "You are not a law enforcement officer, Lieutenant," Davies snapped, taking a step closer. "You are a nurse. Your job, to put it in terms you might understand, is to apply bandages when told, not to play hero in my command center. Miller was attempting to secure a classified asset during a breach. You, with your breathtaking arrogance, decided you knew better. Carter was my patient. My duty is to my patient. Your primary duty is to this Navy and the command structure that keeps it from falling into chaos," he thundered, his face reddening. "Because of you, we have conflicting reports, a security nightmare, and an officer, an academy graduate with a flawless record, I might add, levying accusations against another. You have made this entire investigation a circus." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Your career in the United States Navy is over, Lieutenant. The only question now is whether it ends with a quiet resignation or a court-martial. I strongly advise you to consider the former." The rage bait was cast, and Anya felt herself biting down hard. It was a suffocating, helpless fury. She had done the right thing, the human thing, and this man was meticulously painting it as an act of treasonous ego. The next day was the medical panel. She thought, foolishly, that she might find allies there. She was wrong. She sat at a long, polished table in a conference room at the Naval Medical Center, Portsmouth. 3 senior officers, 2 captains and a commander, all from the Nurse Corps, sat opposite her. Their faces were impassive, their questions clinical and detached. They had read her report. They were not impressed. "Lieutenant Sharma," began Captain Wallace, a stern woman with her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin around her eyes. "Let's walk through your field assessment. You state you observed a laceration to Petty Officer Carter's forehead. Did you assess for pupillary response before moving to shield him?" "Ma'am, Lieutenant Miller was actively assaulting him. My priority was to prevent further injury." "A commendable sentiment, perhaps, but not clinically sound procedure," interjected the second captain, a portly man who kept steepling his fingers. "A potential concussion, a cervical spine injury, these should have been your primary concerns. Was the use of a pressure dressing on the head wound premature, given the risk of increasing intracranial pressure?" They picked apart her every split-second decision from the comfort of their leather chairs. They spoke of textbook procedures for situations that had never seen the inside of a textbook. They dissected her actions with the cold precision of an autopsy, draining them of all context, all urgency, all humanity. They were questioning her competence, the very core of her professional identity. The sub was flooding. An officer was attacking a subordinate, and they wanted to know if she had checked for raccoon eyes. It was a surreal, Kafkaesque nightmare. They weren't there to understand. They were there to find fault, to distance the institution from her rogue actions. She left the room feeling not just reprimanded, but professionally invalidated, as if her years of training and experience meant nothing. The final turn of the screw came from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. The two NCIS agents who interviewed her were a study in contrasts. One was older, with a weary, seen-it-all demeanor. The other was young, ambitious, and radiated suspicion. They didn't place her in an office. They used a small, windowless interrogation room. "So, Lieutenant," the young one began, leaning forward on the metal table. "How well do you know Petty Officer Carter?" "I treated him for a sinus infection a few weeks ago. That's it." "Just a professional relationship?" "Yes, of course." "And Lieutenant Miller?" "I know who he is. We've never had a real conversation." The agent smirked. "But you felt comfortable inserting yourself into a physical altercation with him? An officer you barely know?" He let the question hang in the air. The implication was clear. She was lying. There was more to this story. Maybe she was involved with Carter. Maybe they were in on something together. They asked the same questions over and over, circling back, trying to catch her in a contradiction. They wanted to know about her finances, her family, any off-base associations. They took her personal laptop and phone. They sealed her quarters and conducted a full search. The process was humiliating, designed to strip her of her dignity and make her feel like a criminal. The isolation was now complete. On the base, sailors who once greeted her with a smile now averted their eyes, whispering as she passed. She was confined to her base housing, a pariah, awaiting her fate. The institution she had sworn an oath to protect, the one she had dedicated her life to, had not only abandoned her, but was actively trying to consume her. The fury she'd felt in Davies's office had cooled into a hard, dense ball of disillusionment in the pit of her stomach. She had shielded a young man from harm. And for that, the Navy was going to burn her to the ground. The days bled into one another, each a paler shade of the one before. Anya spent most of her time in her small, sterile apartment in the bachelor officers' quarters, a ghost haunting the monument to her dead career. The salt-laced Norfolk air, once invigorating, now felt heavy and oppressive. She ran through the events on the sub 1,000 times, searching for the moment she had gone wrong. But every time, her mind arrived at the same conclusion. She would do it all again. The thought brought her no comfort, only a bitter taste of injustice. The court-martial was scheduled. Her appointed legal aide, a young lieutenant fresh out of law school, had advised her to plead guilty to disobeying an order and hope for a dishonorable discharge instead of brig time. It was a plea bargain for her soul. She was staring out the window at a formation of sailors marching in the distance, a picture of the order and purpose she no longer possessed, when the knock came. It wasn't the sharp rap of a military summons, but a soft, polite tapping. 2 quick knocks. She opened the door to a man who was utterly out of place. He was in his late 50s, dressed in a plain, perfectly tailored charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than her car. He was of average height and build, with thinning gray hair and unremarkable features, except for his eyes. They were a pale, watery blue, and they seemed to see everything, analyzing and cataloging without a flicker of judgment. He wasn't military. He wasn't NCIS. He carried a thin leather briefcase and an aura of quiet, unshakable confidence. "Lieutenant Anya Sharma," he asked. His voice was calm, almost monotone. "Yes?" "My name is Thorne. May I have a moment of your time?" He didn't wait for an answer, his gaze sweeping past her into the apartment as if he'd already invited himself in. Hesitantly, Anya stepped aside. He walked to the small dining table and set his briefcase down, clicking the latches open with practiced efficiency. He moved like a man who was never in a hurry, because the world waited for him. "Please, sit," he said. It wasn't a request. Anya sat, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. This was not part of the standard procedure for a disgraced officer. Thorne pulled a slim, unmarked tablet from his case and slid it across the table. "I understand you've had a difficult few weeks." On the screen was a detailed schematic of the USS Virginia's forward compartments. The radio room was highlighted in red. He tapped the screen, and a green circle appeared around Petty Officer Carter's. "File photo." "Petty Officer Carter is a brilliant cryptographer," Thorne began, his voice low and even. "One of the best the Navy has produced in a generation. But that isn't his primary function. His primary function is that of a key." Anya stared at him, confused. "A key?" "A human key," Thorne clarified. "We live in an age where any digital protection can be broken. The most secure data requires a biological component for decryption, a unique genetic sequence, a specific biometric signature. The only way to access certain systems is to have Petty Officer Carter physically present and interfacing with them." He paused, letting the weight of the information sink in. The laptop case he was holding was a decoy, a shell filled with useless hardware. Lieutenant Miller knew this. He tapped the screen again. An X-ray image of a human torso appeared. A small, dark object was visible, embedded near the clavicle. The real data vault, the access node, is a bio-implanted device. It requires Carter to be alive to function. However, in a catastrophic scenario, it can be extracted. The process is invasive and universally fatal. Lieutenant Miller's objective was not to rescue the asset. It was to extract the node. The hull breach was not an accident. It was a deliberate act of sabotage orchestrated by Miller to provide the necessary cover for his actions. Anya felt the air leave her lungs. It all clicked into place. Miller's fury, his focus on the case as a misdirection, his utter disregard for Carter's life. "The Navy believes this is a simple case of a rogue officer trying to sell secrets," Thorne continued. "They are, as is often the case, mistaken. Miller works for a rival intelligence agency. They didn't want the data. They wanted to deny us access to it permanently. Killing the key was the mission." Thorne then swiped the screen to an audio file and pressed play. The hissing of the ruptured pipe filled the room, followed by Miller's snarled voice. And then, her own. "Lieutenant Miller, stand down. I am the ranking medical authority on this vessel, and I am ordering you to step away from my patient." The sound of her own voice, so calm and steady in the face of chaos, was jarring. Thorne stopped the recording. "The Navy sees a subordinate who broke the rules," he said, his pale blue eyes locking onto hers. "They see insubordination and chaos. My organization sees something entirely different. We see an operator who, under extreme duress, with no intelligence briefing and no tactical support, correctly identified the most valuable asset in the room and instinctively created a protocol to protect it." He leaned forward slightly, a flicker of something almost like admiration in his gaze. "We call it the Nightingale Protocol, a doctrine centered on the preservation of a human asset by prioritizing their physiological and psychological well-being above all else, using medical authority as a tool for de-escalation and control. You invented it on the fly, in a flooding submarine, with nothing but a medical kit and your own nerve." Anya was speechless. He had taken the act for which she was being crucified and turned it into a doctrine, giving it a name, a weight, a purpose she had never imagined. "I am with the National Security Agency," Thorne said, finally giving his affiliation. "And I am here to offer you a job. You will resign your commission, effective immediately. In return, the court-martial, the NCIS investigation, all of it, will be erased from the record as if it never happened. You'll be a civilian. You'll work for me." "Doing what?" Anya whispered. "The same thing you did on the Virginia," he replied. "Our most valuable assets are not codes or satellites. They are people. Scientists, analysts, defectors, keys like Carter. And they are fragile. They break. They get scared. They require a unique kind of protection that men with guns often fail to provide. We need a keeper, a guardian, a nightingale." He stood up, leaving the tablet on the table. "The alternative is that I walk out that door, and you proceed with your court-martial. The Navy will make an example of you. The choice is yours, Ms. Sharma. But I would suggest you make it quickly." The world of the National Security Agency was not one of crisp uniforms and salty air. It was a world of hushed corridors, biometric scanners, and the persistent low hum of supercomputers processing the secrets of the planet. Anya's new home was a nondescript campus of smoked glass buildings nestled in the woods outside Fort Meade, Maryland. It felt more like a tech corporation's headquarters than the heart of American espionage, but the paranoia was a palpable, living thing that clung to the air like humidity. Her transition was jarring. Thorne had been true to his word. Her Navy records were wiped clean, her resignation accepted under a vague, honorable service clause. But in her new world, she was an anomaly. Her colleagues in the Asset Protection Division were a clique of hardened professionals, men and women drawn from the elite echelons of the CIA and Special Operations. They were operators who spoke in a clipped shorthand of acronyms and fieldcraft, their pasts filled with black ops missions in hostile territories. And they looked at Anya, the boat nurse, with a mixture of suspicion and outright contempt. Her supervisor, a stoic ex-CIA case officer named Elias Vance, saw her as Thorne's pet project. He assigned her a desk in a corner and a mountain of procedural manuals to memorize. "Listen, Sharma," Vance told her during their first meeting, his voice devoid of warmth. "Thorne has a theory about you, about this nightingale concept. Out here, theories get people killed. You have no fieldcraft experience, no weapons training, no understanding of signals intelligence or human intelligence. Tradecraft. You are a liability until you prove otherwise. Don't make me regret signing off on your transfer. The antagonism was different from the Navy's, less personal, but more pervasive. It was the condescending smirk of a former Green Beret named Cade when she fumbled a disassembly of a Glock 19 in training. It was the way they'd pointedly switch conversations to a mission in Kandahar or a dead drop in Moscow whenever she approached the coffee machine. They were a pack, and she was the strange, new animal they hadn't yet figured out how to classify. They called her Doc, but it wasn't a term of endearment. It was a label that kept her separate. After 3 weeks of mind-numbing procedural study, Vance called her into his office. He tossed a thin file onto his desk. We have a situation. One of our top analysts, a man named Dr. Alistair Finch, has gone silent. Finch, Vance explained, was a reclusive genius who specialized in predictive algorithms. A recent minor data leak from his department, a leak that was ultimately harmless, had sent him into a spiral of extreme paranoia. He'd locked himself in his smart home in a gated community in Reston, cut off all communication, and refused access to everyone, including his NSA handlers. The man is a national asset. He holds the only keys to a program that's critical to our counterterrorism efforts, Vance said, rubbing his temples. Cade and his team tried a soft entry yesterday. Finch triggered a perimeter alarm and threatened to wipe his entire system. Their aggressive de-escalation tactics, as they so beautifully put it, almost gave the man a heart attack. Anya looked at Vance. And you want me to try? A humorless smile touched Vance's lips. Thorne wants you to try. He says this is a clinical problem, not a tactical one. Go see the patient, Doc. Don't break him. The ride to Reston was quiet. Cade drove, his jaw set in a resentful line. Look, just don't get in our way, he grumbled. We'll handle security. You go knock on the door and talk about his feelings, or whatever it is you do. Alistair Finch's house was a monument to modern, sterile architecture. When Anya approached the door, a disembodied voice from a hidden speaker demanded, "Identify yourself." Dr. Finch, my name is Anya Sharma. I'm here to see if you're all right. Go away, they sent you, the voice shrieked, laced with genuine terror. Anya ignored the tactical gear Cade's team had offered her. She had her own kit, a simple medical bag. From her initial briefing, she knew Finch was a diabetic who lived alone. Dr. Finch, I'm not with the security team. I'm a nurse, she said, her voice calm and even, projecting it towards the camera she'd spotted above the door. I reviewed your file, and I was concerned that you might have missed a meal or a dose of insulin. High stress can wreak havoc on blood sugar levels. I'm not here to talk about the data leak. I'm here to make sure you're not having a medical emergency. There was a long silence. The tactical team, listening on comms, was motionless. Cade's voice crackled in her ear. What are you doing? Just get him to open the door. Anya ignored him. She took a bottle of water and a protein bar from her bag and set them on the porch. I'm just going to leave these here for you, Dr. Finch, she said. When was the last time you ate something? Sometimes, when we're anxious, we forget the simple things. Another 10 minutes passed. Anya simply stood there, patient and silent. Finally, a series of clicks echoed as the door's mag locks disengaged. The door opened a crack. A single, bloodshot eye peered out. You're really a nurse? He whispered. Yes, sir. Lieutenant, Nurse Corps, United States Navy. Formerly. He opened the door wider. Alistair Finch was a mess. He was a thin man in his 60s, swimming in a stained bathrobe. His skin was pale and clammy, his hands were shaking, and his breathing was shallow. Anya's clinical eye took it all in. Dehydration, sleep deprivation, signs of a severe anxiety attack, possibly bordering on diabetic ketoacidosis. The operators had seen a hostile target to be subdued. Anya saw a patient in acute distress. She spent the next hour with him. She didn't ask a single question about work. She took his blood pressure and checked his glucose levels, which were dangerously high. She got him to drink some water and eat the protein bar. She spoke to him in a quiet, soothing voice, explaining what was happening to his body in a physiological sense, demystifying the terrifying symptoms of his panic. She treated his trauma. As his body began to stabilize, his mind followed. He started talking. He told her about the pressure, the fear of making a mistake, the crushing weight of his responsibilities. And then, quietly, he told her what the NSA needed to know. The leak. It wasn't from my system, he whispered, his voice trembling. It was a ghost, an echo. It was designed to look like it came from me, but the temporal signature on the data packets is wrong. It came from an external breach. They're already inside. They wanted you to focus on me, to discredit me, while they moved deeper into the network. He gave her the specific data string to prove it. It was the critical piece of the puzzle, the clue that turned the entire investigation on its head. He had been too terrified to give it to the men who had come with body armor and stern commands. But he gave it to the woman who brought him a bottle of water and treated him like a human being. When Anya emerged from the house, Cade and his team were waiting, their expressions unreadable. She walked past them to the command vehicle where Vance was monitoring. She relayed Finch's information, her voice all business. Vance listened, his eyes fixed on the data stream Finch had just opened for them. He typed furiously, his face grim. Finally, he looked up at Anya. The open contempt was gone, replaced by a grudging, almost imperceptible nod of respect. "Go home, Sharma," he said. "Good work." It wasn't a hero's welcome, but in this world of shadows and secrets, it was more than enough. She had been tested, and the Nightingale Protocol had been proven. The information from Dr. Finch sent ripples through the agency. The external breach was real, a sophisticated intrusion by a rival intelligence service. And as the NSA's digital forensics team followed the trail, a familiar name emerged from the encrypted logs. Lieutenant, now former Lieutenant, James Miller. After the incident on the Virginia, Miller had been allowed to resign quietly to avoid a scandal. He had promptly disappeared, taking his treachery to the private sector and selling his services to the highest bidder. He was the ghost in their machine. The NSA tracked him to Vienna, a city of classical music and Cold War ghosts. But Miller was good. He was a ghost himself, moving through the city's shadows, never staying in one place for long, communicating through layers of cutouts. They knew he was there, but they couldn't get a hand on him. He was too disciplined, too paranoid. It was Thorne who devised the new strategy during a late-night meeting in a soundproofed conference room at Fort Meade. Vance, Anya, and a half-dozen other senior analysts were present. "Miller's weakness is not greed or ideology," Thorne stated, his pale eyes scanning the faces around the table. "It's ego. His file shows a consistent pattern of pathological narcissism. He cannot stand being bettered. His one significant professional failure was on the USS Virginia. He was thwarted not by a team of armed Marines, but by a single, unarmed nurse. He will not have forgotten that." Thorne looked directly at Anya. "And we will use that." The plan was audacious. It wasn't about luring Miller with money or false intelligence. It was about wounding his pride. the NSA's Psychological Warfare Division crafted a series of subtle, targeted leaks. A mention in a European defense contractor's newsletter of a new American liaison in Vienna with a background in naval asset protection. A doctored photo on a social media profile of an embassy functionary with Anya visible in the background, looking confident and important. They weren't trying to catch his attention directly. They were trying to make him believe that the woman who had humiliated him had not only escaped punishment, but had been promoted to a position of power in the very city where he was hiding. They were making her the prize he couldn't resist. Anya felt a cold knot of fear in her stomach, but she also felt a grim sense of purpose. This was the closing of the circle. 2 weeks later, she was walking through the grand hall of Vienna's Kunsthistorisches Museum, a masterpiece of art and architecture. She was wearing a simple dress with a discreet earpiece, her only concession to the world she now inhabited. To any observer, she was just another tourist admiring the Rembrandts. But her senses were on high alert. Vance, Cade, and a dozen other agents were ghosts around her, blending in as tourists, security guards, and museum staff. She had been following the same routine for 3 days: a coffee at the same cafe, a walk through the same park, a visit to this museum. She was making herself a predictable, tempting target. She was studying a painting by Vermeer when she felt it. A shift in the air, the subtle prickle of being watched. She didn't turn. Instead, she used the reflection in the painting's protective glass. A man, standing by a marble pillar, half hidden in shadow. He was wearing a tourist's ball cap, but there was no mistaking the rigid posture, the intense, predatory stillness. It was Miller. "Vance, I have contact," she murmured, her voice steady. "Pillar to my 3 o'clock. He's made me." "Hold your position," Vance's voice crackled in her ear. "The team is moving. Do not engage." But Anya knew Miller wouldn't be taken by a swarm of agents. His ego demanded a confrontation. He needed to be the one in control. As if on cue, he began to move. Not away, but towards her. He was going to engage. "This is not a tactical problem. It's a clinical one," she thought, Thorne's words echoing in her mind. Miller intercepted her as she moved into the next gallery, which was momentarily empty. He stepped out from behind a large sculpture, blocking her path. He had a tight, cruel smile on his face. "Well, well, Lieutenant Sharma," he said, his voice a low sneer. "Or should I say, Ms. Sharma now? I hear you've landed on your feet. Quite a promotion from changing bedpans on a sewer pipe." Anya met his gaze, letting a flicker of what looked like surprise and fear cross her face, before schooling her features into a mask of composure. "Miller, I should have known." "You ruined a very lucrative operation for me," he said, taking a step closer. The scent of stale coffee was on his breath. "Cost me a lot of money. But what really bothered me was you, a little nurse thinking she could play with the big boys. But it looks like you did, didn't you? They gave you a medal and a cushy desk job in Europe." This was it. The hook. His narcissism was making him talk, making him gloat. "They didn't give me a medal," Anya said, her voice quiet but firm. "They gave me a job because I did what you couldn't. I protected the asset." His smile vanished. A flash of the same fury she'd seen in the flooding submarine crossed his face. "You got lucky. A fluke." "Was it?" Anya countered, taking a small step forward, shifting the dynamic. "Or maybe they realized that someone who understands people is more valuable than a thug who only understands brute force. They saw that you failed because you let your temper get the best of you. You panicked." I did not panic, he hissed, his voice rising. My plan was perfect. I sabotaged the boat. I isolated the key. He was doing it. He was confessing, his ego overriding every bit of his training, desperate to prove his superiority to the woman who had bested him. He laid out the key details of his sabotage, the planned extraction, his connection to the rival agency, all of it pouring out in a torrent of self-justification. A tiny microphone, disguised as a button on her dress, captured every word. And I would have succeeded, he finished, his face inches from hers, if you hadn't stuck your nose where it didn't belong. It's over, Miller, Anya said softly. At that moment, 2 men in the crisp uniforms of the Austrian police stepped into the gallery from one end, while Cade and another agent moved in from the other. Miller was boxed in. He looked from them to Anya, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. He had been so focused on his own monologue, on his need to dominate her, that he hadn't seen the trap close around him. He hadn't been the hunter. He had been the prey all along. Back in a quiet office at the U.S. Embassy, Anya sat with a cup of tea, the adrenaline slowly draining away. Thorne was there, having flown in for the operation's conclusion. He placed a tablet on the table in front of her. It showed an internal Navy dispatch. Commander Davies, for his gross oversight and failure of command in the Virginia incident, had been reassigned. His new post, supervising supply inventory at a naval base in Guam. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of being sent to Siberia. A quiet, career-ending failure. It was the justice she had never expected to get. There was a knock on the door. A young man in a civilian suit walked in, a shy smile on his face. It took Anya a moment to place him, without the blood and terror. "Ben?" she breathed. Ben Carter looked healthy and whole. He was no longer in the Navy. The NSA had folded him into one of their research divisions. I heard you were in town," he said, his voice filled with a profound, quiet gratitude. "I just wanted to thank you. For my life." The words hit her harder than any official commendation could have. This was why she had done it. This living, breathing person was the result of her choice. After Carter left, Thorne looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the faintest hint of a smile touch the corners of his mouth. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible expression, but it was there. "Welcome to the program, Ms. Sharma," he said. She had been right all along. She hadn't changed who she was. She was still a nurse, a guardian, a protector. She had just finally found the place where the world didn't see that as a violation of the rules, but as the most valuable rule of all.